Edward Said's book Orientalism explores the relationship between East and West, especially how Western dominance in academia has shaped public policy about Asia and the Middle East. It also examines how the Orient is viewed as a place of mystery and danger that needs to be tamed by Occidentals. Edward Said's Orientalism is about the power of Western countries, that is, the Occident, over non-Western countries, that is, the Orient. He says that while Americans and Europeans have different ideas about what constitutes the Orient, he is interested in looking at the influence of both US and European intellectual and political investment in Asia and the Middle East. While there are differences between these two groups, they share a lot of common ground when it comes to their views on Asia or the Middle East. Therefore, one has to look at how Westerners think about Asia or the Middle East as well as how they behave towards it historically to get a more complete picture of Orientalism. In Orientalism, Edward Said builds up his argument and analysis in three long chapters. Chapter 1: The Scope of Orientalism. The scope of Orientalism covers all the dimensions of the subject, both in terms of historical experiences and time period. Moreover, it also covers the subject in terms of political as well as philosophical themes. Said provides a review of pre-18th century writing on the Muslim Near East and socio-political impact of Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798. According to him, the East was viewed as a textual universe for the West. The European Orientalists had keen interest in classical rather than contemporary period of the Eastern culture. Chapter 2: Oriental Structures and Restructures. In this chapter, Said traces the development of modern Orientalism by presenting a broadly chronological description. He also attempts to trace it by describing a set of devices usually common to the works of popular artists, poets, and scholars. Said presents a review of the French and English traditions of the study of Muslim Near East during the 19th century and further up to the World War I. For this purpose, his major focus is on the works of French Orientalists such as Sylvester de Sacy and the works of English Orientalists like Edward Lane's Account of the Manners and Customs of the Modern Egyptians, published in 1836. Furthermore, in this chapter, Edward Said endeavors to demonstrate how Orientalism has influenced and affected the Western perceptions of the Arab Middle East and the Middle Eastern perceptions of themselves. Chapter 3: Orientalism Now. This chapter of Orientalism begins at the point where its predecessors had left off. It means around 1870. This period is characterized with great colonial expansion on the Orient, culminating in the Second World War. The last section of this chapter characterizes the shift from British and French to American hegemony. It presents the current social and intellectual realities of Orientalism in the USA. Said begins this chapter with a discussion of Orientalism in the 1920s and 1930s. For this purpose, he reviews the careers of leading Islamicists of that time like French scholar Louis Massignon and the English historian Hamilton Gibb. Edward Said takes note of the lectures of Hamilton Gibb as director of the Center of Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, especially his views on the Arab mind and the aversion of the Muslim from the thought process of rationalism, referring to Islam as Mohammedanism. Under the subtitle The Last Phase, Edward Said reviews post-World War II Orientalism as the United States came to be the center of activity with regard to the East. In this latest phase, the highly qualified American area specialists took the lead, replacing the earlier philologists. Edward Said examines the role of these area specialists of the East. According to him, they help to perpetuate the dynamics of Orientalism in their representation of Islam and Arabs in four categories. These four categories are: 1. Popular image and social science representation. 2. Public relations policy. 3. Merely Islam. 4. To see the Orient as an imitation West. First category, popular image and social science representation. In this category, Said discusses the popular images and social science representation of the East. He argues that the treatments of Arabs and Islam by the area specialists are predictably and routinely negative, as they derive from the transference of the popular anti-Semitic animus of the Jews to Arabs. Said asserts it is the academic studies that support these negative images. These images are actually the negative caricatures of Arab and Islamic culture. Second category, public relations policy. In the second category of misrepresentation of the Arabs and Islam, Said takes on the American public relations policy. It is this policy by which he says that contemporary scholars try to perpetuate the tradition set by European Orientalists. For example, the racist discourse and dogmas of Ernest Renan in the 1840s. He bases his argument on the work of Gustav von Grunge-Born. He was a German Orientalist who entertained an almost virulent dislike for Islam. Said finds the following dogmas implicit in the works of Grunge-Born and other such Orientalists. Dogma number 1: absolute difference between the Occident, that is rational and superior, and the Orient, that is aberrant and inferior. Dogma number 2: the superiority of abstractions regarding the Orient against direct evidence from the contemporary Orient itself. Dogma number 3: the recognition that the Orient is to be feared and controlled. Third category, merely Islam. Said labels the third category of contemporary Orientalist representations as merely Islam. He attacks the allegedly inherent inability of the Muslim Near Orient to be as richly human as the West. He also cites the view of a prominent political scientist. According to this view, the Muslim mind is capable of only 4 out of 8 human thought processes. To this he adds the presumption of the president of the Middle East Studies Association that since the Arab language is much given to rhetoric, the Arabs are consequently incapable of true thought. Fourth category, Orient is an imitation West. In the fourth category, Edward Said places and takes on the contemporary Western Orientalists' presumption that Orient is an imitation West. He also highlights their efforts to encourage the Easterners to judge themselves by Western criteria and to work for achieving the Western goals. Said deplores that the modern Orient has fallen for the bait and is participating in its own Orientalizing. Edward Said winds up his discussion of Orientalism by briefly addressing the positive side to the problem of reliable scholarship in the field of Orientalism. He hopes that the honest work on the Arabs and Near Orient is likely to be done by scholars whose allegiance is to a discipline defined intellectually and not to a field like Orientalism defined either canonically or imperially or geographically. Edward Said's major claims in Orientalism. the four central claims that Said's book makes are as follows. First, while Orientalism presents itself as an objective field of study, it was used to justify the political domination of the East by the West. Secondly, Orientalism was actually more about defining itself through the mirror of the East rather than it was about objectively studying it. Third, points 1 and 2 are produced and reinforced by viewing the Orient as a homogeneous group. This essentialist thinking was a false way of viewing people groups and their culture. Edward Said also rejects the validity of the terms Orient and Occident. Still, he employs them because this is how the argument has been framed by the Orientalists. Lastly, the Orientalist scholars are the product of the system they come from. Due to this, they can't help but to misrepresent the other. Therefore, what we need is for the subaltern to speak for itself. Conclusion. Said outlined a theory where Orientalism arose out of a need for the West to define itself as the opposite of a counterbalancing entity. Europe found this counterbalancing entity in the Crusades to be the Orient. The West found itself in positions of political and military power over what it saw as the Orient and subsequently used this power to subjugate it. Developing alongside this power, giving legitimacy and traction, was the scholar of the Orient, the Orientalists. Once a tradition of superior values of the West and a static view of the Orient developed, the tradition crystallized, and it was and is nearly impossible to break free for any scholar inside the tradition. However, humans make their own history, and every society is a constant state of flux and development. Thus, what is necessary is for each people group to speak for itself and create discourses of its own history. They must share and dialogue with other people groups with the goal of true knowledge of the other and not merely political knowledge.